It's a difficult gospel, isn't it? Kind of challenging. So let's see what we can do with it and see if it has something to say to our lives in practical ways. Some of you might know that Viktor Frankl was a Jewish man, a psychologist in Europe during the Second World War, and that he was arrested and thrown in prison in Auschwitz, in the concentration camp. And he survived it and wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And it comes from his experience of Auschwitz himself, as well as noticing the behavior of other people. One of the things he said in that book is this: the only thing you cannot take away from me is the way I choose to respond to what you do to me. The last of one's freedom is to choose one's attitude in any given situation. Want to do that again? The only thing, when he walked in there, everything was stripped from him. Okay? The only thing cannot take away from me is the way I choose to respond to what you do to me. The last of one's freedom is to choose one's attitude in any given situation. How I respond to somebody else, you can't take that away from me. That's my choice. And he saw people in concentration camp respond in many different ways. When something violent or unjust is done to us, we're familiar with two basic responses: fight or flight. Right? And if we look in the gospel, we can see that Jesus did each of those. For example, when the scribes and the Pharisees were pressing upon him and verbally slapping him, he said to them, "You whitened sepulchres, you hypocrites, you wash the outside of a cup, but the inside is full of filth." Jesus was always nice, right? He wasn't. He stood his ground and said things in a forceful way when he needed to. And sometimes we need to. He also got into flight. I remember the time when he was speaking in the temple and people picked up rocks to stone him. So angry were they that it says in the scriptures that he hid behind a pillar and then snuck away. And sometimes when violence is done to us in one way or another, we need to run. So that remains true, both of those. Sometimes we need to do each. But Jesus in the Gospels today is showing us another way. So he says, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, offer them the left. Someone wants to take your shirt, your cloak, give them your shirt. Someone wants to force you to carry their pack 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. You like that? Well, let's see what it means. I think the best way to see what it means is to see what Jesus did. So, let's go to the gospel. Jesus was arrested. This is in the Gospel of John, chapter 18. Jesus was arrested and brought before the high priest Annas. And the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his doctrine. Jesus answered him, "I have spoken publicly to the world. I have always taught in a synagogue or in a temple area where all the Jews gather in secret. I have said nothing. Why ask me? Oh, in secret I have said nothing. Why ask me? Ask those who heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. When he said this, one of the temple guards standing there struck Jesus and said, "Is that the way you answer the high priest?" And Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me?" Does that sound like a doormat to you? He knows who he is, and he speaks his truth. And he gets hit on one cheek, but he faces him. Instead of turning away, he faces him and says, "If I've spoken rightly, why hit me?" That's not a doormat. St. Paul, of course, one of his most famous followers, was arrested, and he was before the Sadducees and some Pharisees, and so he's called up before the Sanhedrin. So Paul says, "My brothers, I'm a Pharisee, the son of Pharisees. I am on trial for hope in the resurrection of the dead." When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the group became divided, and they got into fisticuffs. That's not in here, but what does he do? He says, "These people hate each other. I'm just going to say I'm one of them and then let them go at it." So he steps back. Does that sound stupid to you? It sounds wise. What I think is a more contemporary example. I remember this from years back. Martin Luther King wrote something about when he was a child, and he and his dad were driving through a city, whatever city, and the policeman pulled them over. Mr. King rolls down his window, and the policeman walks up to him and says, "Well, boy, you're going too fast. So, boy, let me see your license." And Martin Luther King says, his dad said, "Officer, you see this child? This child is a boy. I'm a man, and I'm speaking to you, man to man." Does that sound like a doormat to you? Does it sound like violence? Does it sound like running away? Does it sound like Jesus? It does to me. So, he said, turn the other cheek. Not to cower away, but to stand up and say, "I know who I am. And I'm going to speak that truth." That helps. He also says, the thing about taking the shirt off your back. Someone requires the cloak, give him your shirt as well. What Jesus is trying to do with these things is kind of say that you have a choice. And doing the unexpected can ratchet down what's going on. And it could surprise them so much that they get out of their role of violence and as an abuser and people begin to see each other more as person to person. So, if someone requires your cloak, give them your shirt. Well, in one way you might say, how is it that being generous to somebody else, especially an enemy, how is it in being generous to them might ratchet down the whole situation and show that, I'm not going to be your victim. The other one was, if someone forces you to walk 1 mile, so the soldiers could force you to carry this pack 1 mile, and that was it. Go with them another mile. Why am I going to do that? To say that, look, you look like you're tired. Let me lift the burden from you a little bit. I'll carry it on my own. I choose to carry it for you. I hate it when somebody tries to manipulate me into something that I would readily do. That ever happened to you? You know what I mean? They're afraid I won't do it. They don't give me the chance to say yes. And it's like, so what would happen if we showed some willingness to lift another person's burden? Might that ratchet things down a bit? Don't we see enough hatred and violence and vengeance in our own world? What we see in the Middle East? That's been going on for thousands of years. The roots of it are found in the Old Testament. And into that society where Jesus was born. Because violence begets violence, and vengeance doesn't bring healing. How is it that we can do more of that in our own life? How is it that if we get verbally slapped, we can say something like, "Why did you do that? I don't think I deserve that." Think of the last terrible argument you were in. What if one of you had said, "I don't want to yell at you, and I'm not going to. Why are we doing that?" Might that have helped? What this does is it requires more creativity from us, and it requires an effort, and the effort doesn't mean that we will never fail, because in fact we will. But it means it is what we are called to do and a better way to live our life. So Jesus said, "You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I say unto you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." And why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we pray for our enemies? Because they're the ones that perhaps need it, as well as ourselves. To say, why are we standing like this with each other? Pray for them. Whatever's bothering them, pray for them, that they might be healed. Book of Leviticus, it says, "You shall not bear hatred for your brother or sister in your heart. Though you may have to reprove your fellow citizen, though you may have to correct someone, do not incur sin because of him." Doesn't mean, well, it's not my business. Doesn't mean I can't say anything. It says if we have to say something, do it without sin. "You shall take no revenge and cherish no grudge against any of your people. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." In the second reading, we heard St. Paul say, "You are the temple of God. The Spirit of God lives in you." And it says you belong to Christ. We all belong to Christ. And if we can look at others that way, it just might help. You all belong to Christ, and Christ belongs to God. He wants us to be on that journey, to live a life of peace as brothers and sisters on our collective way to God.